Come along. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. And you may have noticed, but I've got a new assistant. This is Ned. And Ned is a new member of the family and is now 10 weeks old and has been with us for about 10 days and has stamped his mark on everything. He's getting to know the garden very well, mainly by eating it. And what he doesn't eat, he dives into and sees how much he can crush, which is going to be an interesting development horticulturally. You're going to get to learn not to do that, aren't you? Okay, we came here to pick some beans, Ned, which actually he's already sampled and found good, so it's time that we had some. If you remember, I sowed these about 6 weeks ago, and they've grown well, but we haven't picked any yet, so now it's high time. This is purple teepee, which are lovely and purple. Look, if I give you that, will you eat that? And just so it's fair, Nellie, Nell, by the way, has been very good, but quite wary. There you are, you have that one, there's a good girl. But purple teepee are beautiful and purple on the plant. That actually changes to green when you cook them. And thank you very much, Ned, that's helpful. You can see why I've hardly done any gardening in the last week, because every time Ned comes to help, and it's not always in the way that I want help. However, we will get these to the kitchen eventually. And the beauty of these, of course, is that they grow perfectly well at this time of year. So if you keep picking them over, they will keep producing new pods. So don't let them get too big. However, if they do get big and tough, well, then keep them. Let them dry off, and that will provide you seed for next year. Now, coming up on today's programme, Adverley explores a stunning Japanese garden in Clackmannanshire.
One of the most striking things about this garden is the sheer attention to detail, from the planting down to the tiny little knots that hold the bamboo together. It's exquisite.
We meet a gardener who decided to focus all his horticultural attention on the mint family.
I started collecting mint. Within a year, I'd got maybe 10 or 12. Another year later, I'd maybe got 50. Some years later, I've now got 187 types.
And Toby visits an allotment in Bristol where people with dementia and their carers come together to share a love of gardening.
Why was creating this project important to you?
I guess I kind of felt that I've experienced that sort of therapeutic side of gardening, and I knew that it had this like really transformative effect.
And I shall be sowing some grossi, so I can have lots of plants for next year. Come on. Come on. At this time of year, there are still plenty of flowers, but they belong to summer. They're the ones that have lasted and hopefully will last for a few weeks longer. But very few plants come into flower at this time of year. And once we get to November, hardly any at all. However, there is one that I really like, and it's this. This is a Mahonia. It's Mahonia media winter sun. And Mahonias work really well for two reasons. On the one hand, they're evergreen, they've got rather prickly leaves, so you certainly don't want them next to a path where you brush against them. But they are a really reliable backdrop in a shady position. They will take a lot of shade and quite a lot of drought. If you grow them in full sun, though, they will need more water, but they don't like boggy conditions. But this is the key thing. Once we get to late November and December, they flower gloriously. These racemes of wonderful yellow flowers on a fairly upright plant with a fragrance that can match lily of the valley. Luckily, Ned is helping me dig a hole. Ned, this is not really going to end well, because if you dig things up, you'll get into trouble. Look at you all dirty. Now we want to dig here. This is a great time of year to plant any woody shrubs, trees or hedging. You can see that's a very nice root system because you can see the roots, but they're not going round and round. That's in no way root bound. And I can just slightly break them up, and that way you stimulate regrowth. And it's the new growth that is most important for feeding. It will grow to about 6 foot tall, will spread about 3 or 4 foot. If it gets too big, you just cut it back immediately after flowering. But just be aware you're going to do more harm by planting them too deep than too shallow. Aim for the same level as they are in the pot. Got any doubt at all, just raise them up a little bit. And that way they'll be much better to resist drowning, which is a very common cause of trouble with young trees and shrubs. And then, of course, even though this is very good in dry conditions, give it a really good soak. Now, Adderley has been to a garden near the town of Dollar, which is not far from Stirling, which I didn't know about, and which is absolutely extraordinary.
Nestled in the hills of Clackmannanshire, there's something of a surprise. A Japanese garden. More surprisingly, it was created back in 1908 by an intrepid woman called Ella Christie, and it has recently been restored by Japanese garden designers. It's quite a story and quite a garden. Ella Christie started travelling when her father died. She was the first Western woman to meet the Dalai Lama and ventured to the far corners of India, China and Russia. But it was Japan and its gardens that really inspired her. And when she came home, she looked for the perfect spot on the family estate to create her own. Amazingly, she found a female Japanese garden designer called Taki Handa studying in the UK. And together they created a traditional Japanese garden. It charmed visitors until it was destroyed by vandals in the 1960s. And now it's been beautifully and carefully restored. Japan has a long tradition of gardens, and what Ella created was a stroll garden, a large space for walking, admiring the views and contemplating. Every element of the garden, like this entrance gate, has exquisite detail, purpose and meaning. The sign says Sha Rakuen, the place of pleasure and delight. And these stones are intentionally uneven to slow you down as you enter, helping to calm the mind. Japanese gardens honour nature and the wider landscape of trees, mountains and water. A garden is a distilled, artful version, with stones and mounds mirroring the mountains, and trees reflected here in water. So perfectly arranged that sitting here is like looking at a work of art, which of course it is. In an English garden, trees would often be grouped in threes or fives, but not here. They're in ones and twos, which means you can really appreciate their form and structure. There's even a word for the gaps in between things. It's called ma. In Ella's time, this pavilion was a boathouse, but is now a stunning tea house. And next to it is a beautiful zigzag bridge. It symbolises the journey through life with all its twists and turns. I imagine health and safety would prefer a sturdy handrail. But it wouldn't be life, would it, without the odd risk? It leads to a sacred space at the end of life, and the next bridge is arched. Because none of us can see exactly what happens next. There are other bridges too, with more precise stones to slow down the walker and the mind. And everywhere there is considered meticulous precision. One of the most striking things about this garden is the sheer attention to detail, from the planting to the construction of every single building, down to the tiny little knots that hold the bamboo together. It's exquisite. The restoration has been led by Professor Fukuhara, who advised on the Japanese gardens at Kew and Tatton. One of the few new additions is the dry or Zen garden. Traditionally, they were built in monasteries in mountainous regions with little running water. This rippling gravel mirrors that movement, and the monks would have raked it as part of their meditative practice. Here is the gardener's job. The team have woven a family story in too, placing stones to represent Ella, her nephew Bobby, and her great-niece Sarah, who began the restoration of this garden. This is an astonishing place, melding the past and the present with thoughtful cultural precision. That's the key to this garden. Throughout its history, it's been led by Japanese garden designers, and its authenticity is palpable.
I do know how hard it is to create a truly authentic Japanese garden. It's one of the reasons I've not attempted it here at Longmeadow, even though I love them, because I know just how hard it is to get it absolutely right. Now, here in the Paradise Garden, the actual stars are these amarines. The amarines are a cross between amaryllis and nerine, and they grow much like nerines, but the amaryllis parentage makes them bigger and slightly more robust. So what you have is much more elegance than any amaryllis and more drama than most nerines. And they are, I think, the definition of shocking pink. But you can get them in white and you can get them in much paler colours. And I think at this time of year they are the most spectacular plants in the whole of the garden. It's time now to visit one of your gardens, and it belongs to Carmen Konopka in Bishop Stortford.
Hello, my name's Carmen, and my husband David and I love our garden here in Hertfordshire. There's all sorts of things we love about it, but there is one plant that I'm particularly proud of and I particularly love at this time of year. It's this great big fig tree behind me. I grew our two trees by cuttings, but we've since found there's a much better way of propagating fig trees, which is by layering. As you can see, there's a tendency for fig tree branches to come right down to the ground. What we do is to put a pot of compost where a branch comes down, and then we peg the branch into that compost. This one went in at the beginning of the growing season, and you can see it's got a nice little shoot. But there's another one here, and as you can see, that's a really handsome little tree. It's taken perhaps 7 months. These are some of the ones we've harvested, and as you can see, they're wonderful big figs. Isn't that absolutely perfect? That's yummy.
Come on. Good boy. You go first. There's a good boy. Well, Carmen's figs are truly impressive, and I do think that perhaps we should all use layering more than we do. I suspect that most people find it either a bit arcane or suspect it might take a long time or not work, and clearly that isn't the case. It works beautifully. One of the best doers, and actually one of the most beautiful flowers in the garden at this time of year, is this salvia, Salvia amistad. It's flowering strongly now, and I've known it flower till Christmas. However, it's not truly hardy. If you've got good drainage, you can leave this outside and it will overwinter and it'll be fine, maybe mulch it. However, if like me, you've got heavy soil, then you have to either dig them all up and take them in to a frost-free shed or greenhouse, or, and perhaps, take cuttings. So you've got new plants coming through. And salvias take well from cuttings. What you need to look for is a nice, strong stem that doesn't have a flower. And the more I look at this amistad, the less material there is for cutting. However, around the corner, I have got one that's got better examples. This is Salvia fulgens with these bright vermilion flowers. And I think I can get some cutting material from this. Now, these side shoots are pretty good, and they tend to strike very easily. And in fact, rather than cut the side shoots, you can peel them off. That goes in there like that. Although salvia cuttings take very well, they can dry out on you. And so always a polythene bag to slow down that drying off process. Now, as with all cuttings, speed is of the essence. So if we take something like this, and it's worth just taking one at a time and closing it up, we want to clean off the bottom. By and large, it's best to cut below a node like that, and then just take off the bottom leaves and put that in there, round the outside, make a hole. So this is about 50-50 perlite and our normal compost mix. Now we can do this with all of them. Now you can see there's a bud on this one, and I'm going to nip that bud off, and that should be fine. Now is not the best time to take salvia cuttings. This is an insurance policy, just in case you lose the parent plant. The best time is either in spring or again in about June, July, when you've got really vigorous growth and not so many flower buds. Now, it is important to water the growing medium and then keep it moist. And a very good way of doing that is use one of these zipper bags, the bag that you've collected them in. You put them over the pot, seal it tight about the top, and that keeps the moisture in. And if you can add some heat to the bottom, and a windowsill above a radiator will do fine, or a heated mat, then those cuttings will take quickly. And within 2 or 3 weeks, you'll have roots, and you can either leave them over winter or pot them on then. They won't grow much over winter, but they'll be ready to grow away in spring. Now, we all have our favourite plants, but some people focus intently in and become, if not obsessed, then certainly fascinated by one family or one genus. And we went to visit Simon Poole in Broxton in Cheshire, who is self-admittedly completely enthralled by the mint family.
My name's Si Poole. I'm an Associate Professor of Cultural Education at the University of Chester. Gardening's just a solace for me. It's just become a fascination, really, a way of relaxing, but a way of reflecting as well. Spending time in the garden's great for just having a think, you know. And as time's gone on, I've just become infatuated with all the different species and all the different sorts of things that you can find. I've always had this broad knowledge. I didn't really have any depth of knowledge at all, so I decided to just choose a species, choose a genus, and find out as much as I could about it as possible. Now, I'm quite busy with my day job and other things, so I needed to choose a plant that would tolerate neglect. So I went with mint because of its functionality, but also because it's quite easy to look after. And so I started collecting mint. Within a year, I'd got maybe 10 or 12. Another year later, I'd maybe got 50. Some years later, I've now got 187 types of mint growing here in the garden. After about 2 years, I applied to become a national plant collection with Plant Heritage, and I was successful. So I'm now one of 3 in the country. So the mint hedge that I've got that sort of corners in the veggie patch is where most of the varieties are kept. So we've got quite a few here. Jessica's Sweet Pear, we've got Hillary's Sweet Lemon, which was named after Hillary Clinton. A cracking one here, just underneath this Chinese wonder tree, is the Japanese mint. That's by far the best in tea. It just makes the most beautiful, complex, but subtle cup of tea. It's lovely. And this apple mint is the mint that's traditionally used in mint sauce. So this is a desert mint. There's a couple of these. They're Mentha longifolias. The interesting thing about this, it's a Habeck mint, a subspecies, but it's from Palestine. So it's known as the Bible mint because it's the mint that would have been around 2,000 years ago in Palestine. This is Corsican mint, which, as you can see, provides a brilliant ground cover. It's unusual, not least because of its tiny foliage and a very unusual scent. But it's unusual because it's quite deep-rooted, unlike other mints, which are quite shallow-rooted, which is why they sort of spread so vigorously and readily. The other thing that's interesting about Corsican mint is what they make creme de menthe out of, which is a spirit. The idea of growing for well-being is something central to what I do, really. The main thing for me with mint is that it's not just a healing herb, it's so sensory, you know. Obviously, we use it in our dishes and our drinks and so on, but even just brushing past it and releasing the scent is just such a calming, nearly soporific effect. About 3 years ago, my dad died, and it was a difficult time for me, but what I did find was that I was spending more time out in the garden, and it's a good time to reflect. It's quiet, it's still, and I found I was pottering more and more in the evenings, and I think the reason for that was that it was clearly part of my grieving process. It was just a way that I was going through what had happened and come to terms with it, really. And central to that was nurturing, and that itself was the healing quality, I think, that I needed. The mint is all grown in 5-litre pots, but they're all quite close together, and I formed a kind of hedge with them. I use a mix of compost and sand, so 2 parts compost, 1 part sand. Usually throw a handful of grit in if I've got it. And that's pretty much it. It loves water, so you can't water it enough. It doesn't even mind having wet feet. So the only way to get a true to type propagation is asexually. And one way you can do that, probably the easiest way, is to take a cutting from a plant like this, just strip the leaves off, like that, and just pop it in some water, and then over time, over a week or so, you'll start to get some roots. I've got some here that I propagated about 2 weeks ago, and the roots are really developed now on this, as you can see. So one thing that people often worry about when they buy mint is how vigorous it is as a plant. And they're right to worry, because if you put it in the ground, it will spread. There are ways of growing the more vigorous types of mint. And the most common way is to grow them in pots. You can sink these into the ground. People do different things. Sometimes they take the bottom off the pot, but you can keep them in the pot with the bottom still attached and they'll grow fine. So one good thing to know about mint, if you're keeping it in pots, is that over winter they can die off because the roots circle around the pot and end up being around the outside. So what we want to do is get those roots right into the middle of the pot. Okay, you can see there, the roots have really gone right around the pot. So I'm going to take a spade and we're going to do the Pac-Man method. People of a certain generation might remember Pac-Man. And then turn the plant in on itself and repot. And obviously top it up with some fresh soil and compost. And now the roots are in the centre and less prone to frost damage in the winter months. It's a funny thing because I didn't expect to love mint quite as much as I've ended up loving it. It was just, I thought there were only, 4 or 5 types of mint in the world, the ones that you see in garden centres. But if you go hunting, then you can find all sorts of different things. And, 187 later, you're a bit hooked.
I really like Simon's tip of cutting the plant in half and folding it back on itself, keeping the roots in the middle, protecting them from the cold and regenerating them. Now I want you to have a look at this. This is a delphinium. It flowered very well in June and July, and then I cut it back to the ground and, hey presto, it regrows and it reflowers and should go on flowering until the frost comes. Now, still to come on today's programme. We meet a couple whose foreign travels inspired them to create a tropical paradise in their back garden in Leeds.
I can walk into a garden, you're completely surrounded by foliage, you brush past plants as you're going down, and around every corner there's something a little bit mysterious.
And Toby visits an allotment in Bristol that helps people with dementia to continue to enjoy gardening.
Is this place now part of the rhythm of your year, would you say, David?
I suppose it is. We're thoroughly enjoying it.
Basically, it's for both of us. I say to him every time we drive away, I just feel a bit lighter.
But first we're going to one of your gardens, and it belongs to Sarah Rushton in Surrey.
Hello Gardeners World, my name's Sarah and we live in Dorking in Surrey. Our garden is less than 4 metres wide, so our gardening involves blurring the boundaries and borrowing the landscape. But what I really wanted to show you is down the end of our little garden. I'm lucky to have a cabin which has turned into a home office. The view from my desk was, until recently, an ugly breeze block wall. Prompted by the advice that if I provide water, the wildlife will come, I have made my own water feature. Using a plant trough, which I filled and painted with swimming pool paint, I've soldered some copper wire pipe and used an old pump to circulate water through the lion's mouth and back again. I was inspired by my brother's pond, and he divided some of his pond plants to share with me. And since they've arrived, they've been doing really well. And they're just starting to cascade down the side of the pot, which is really lovely. And here's the end result. It brings me so much joy when I'm working to look out, hear the water run and watch the wildlife come and go. And I've already started to get visitors. Thanks for watching Gardeners World. Bye.
What Sarah has discovered is that you don't need to have anything that's big, complicated or expensive to get a huge amount of pleasure when it comes to creating an environment for wildlife in our gardens. Just a little bit of water, a few plants, and as she says, they'll come. Now, I'm sowing some grass seeds, but this is a long-term project. This is part of my revamping of the orchard beds, which suffered badly as a result of this summer's drought. But to get the effect I want, because these are long beds, I want to have great drifts and runs of grasses. And that means scores and maybe even sort of hundreds of plants to get that effect. And that's a lot of money. It's much, much cheaper and just as effective to sow them. And the first one is Descampsia cespitosa, which is the tufted hairgrass. It loves acidic soil in shade. What it won't do is grow happily on chalk or limestone, especially if it's in full sun. I've also got a Carex, a sedge, which is from New Zealand, and that will respond to sun by turning a lovely bronze colour. And finally, I've got a grass I've never grown before, which is Chasmanthium latifolium, which is a wild oat grass. Now, oats create movement and they add a texture which you don't really get from other grasses. I want to stress these are perennials. These are not annual grasses. These will take a year or even two to develop and then should last for years after that. Now, I've soaked my seed trays before sowing. And that's always a good idea to do if you're dealing with very small seeds. Now I'm going to start with the Descampsia. Now I just spread these as thinly as I can, because when the seedlings emerge, they will be tiny. So if you get great clumps, it's quite hard to separate them when it comes to pricking out. And then I'm going to cover them over. I'm going to use vermiculite, which is really the perfect material for this because it retains some water, so it keeps some moisture in. That's all I need. Right, that will need some heat. I'll put that in the greenhouse. The windowsill will be absolutely fine. 15 to 20 degrees. They will germinate, keep them protected over winter, and then as they grow on, as soon as they're large enough to handle, they can be pricked out into plugs. They might be ready to plant out next summer. We might have to wait for them. Now that's that one. And this is a slightly different technique. And these are the seeds that I've never grown before, the Chasmanthium, the oats. These actually need stratifying. Now, stratification is where a seed needs a period of cold weather to trigger it to germinate when it warms up again. So I'm not going to put these in the greenhouse. I would actually keep them outside, probably under the protection of a bit of glass. An open-sided cold frame will be ideal. Now I'm going to press these down, and I'm just going to gently make sure that there's direct contact with the soil. And then cover them very lightly. I shall take this to the greenhouse, this to the unheated cold frame, and we are going now to Leeds to visit the garden of Simon and Richard Maybury, who have created it based on their travels.
I can walk into the garden, you're completely surrounded by foliage, you brush past plants as you're going down, and around every corner there's something a little bit mysterious. I think what we've created is somewhere where you can walk into there and not feel like you're in Leeds anymore. You completely disappear into that almost like a fantasy.
The garden gives us this feeling like we're on holiday.
My name is Simon Maybury.
My name is Richard Maybury.
And this is our tropical oasis in Leeds.
The garden is about 5 metres wide by 7 metres long, so it's not a massive garden.
I got my way, didn't I? Basically. I wanted a garden. Took a lot of persuasion, but I got there in the end.
I suppose I like the brightness of the back garden and having some sun in, so it took me a bit of time to come to terms with it, I suppose.
I think the inspiration comes from our holidays in Vietnam and Thailand. We love the foliage and the feel of the dense jungle.
Just brings like happy memories for us from Vietnam, where we got engaged.
I think we've been doing the jungle side of it just about a year and a half.
But we've done a few things in the background to sort of help speed things up a little bit. We've raised up the palm trees so that they're quite a way off the ground already, and that just gives you that natural height initially. So here we've got a waterfall, and this is inset into a raised bed, quite a tall one, which gives some extra height here to this double palm Trachycarpus fortunei, to give us this instant canopy that we were looking for straight away.
I'm the gardener, and it's fair to say that you're the DIY.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
We'll choose plants together, but if Richard picks up a pair of secateurs, I don't really like it. At the start of the year, we had a very blank area at the back of the garden that we couldn't figure out what to do with. So basically, we decided to create a fernery. This is because this area is probably the shadiest part of the garden. There's probably about 20 to 25 different ferns here now. We have the beautiful Dicksonia antarctica, absolutely stunning, loves it here, huge big fronds, perfect plant for this area. This is a Sauromatum Indian giant, beautiful leaves, as you can see the lovely texture on them, gorgeous stems which are absolutely stunning. Hardy, come up from the ground every year, no problem at all, and it just gives that really lush tropical feeling in this area of the garden that was previously just completely unused. I've had chronic anxiety for probably about 15 years. My mental health issues came from me coming out when I was 40. It brought me crashing to earth, and it put me into a very tough period for a long time. Then I got into gardening. I can't express how much it improves your mood and your health by just being able to step out and just do little things like tending a plant or stepping out and walking down the path and hearing the water. It just calms you and soothes you. Bad moods go. We currently have about, by my count, about 418 different plants in the garden. I mean, we've got plants from Vietnam, like Rubus lineatus, which is a bramble. Amazing foliage, textured leaves, it's gorgeous. And that's hardy as well, because it's obviously from the highlands of Vietnam. We have the Dendroceras littoralis, which is a cabbage tree. And that's from the Juan Fernandez Islands, which is to the west of Chile. And that's actually an endangered species as well. And I grew that from seed, very, very easily. Lots germinated, and it grows fast. I grow a lot from seeds. So the winter period, when obviously the garden's at its lowest, I'll spend all winter growing. So the kitchen becomes my propagation area.
We didn't have a dining room table for most of last winter, so...
And Christmas was fun.
Yeah, so it's not ideal, but when someone's got a passion for growing things, you know, you want to let them enjoy that passion.
That's not what you said earlier.
Just in the centre of the garden here, we just built this trellis arch, and the great thing about this is that we've got this lovely Clematis armandi, which is growing up. This is an evergreen armandi, so it gives us that lush tropical feel like all through the year.
Another good tip is to use more common species like Angelica. They grow very, very fast, very cheap. They come out in beautiful flower heads, which when dry, become almost architectural in themselves. Crocosmia is another good one. Stunning flowers. A lot of people don't like them because they can be quite invasive. What I do is keep mine in a pot. So you get that amazing pop of colour in summer, but it doesn't spread everywhere and it's easy to control. Maintenance-wise, apart from deadheading and cutting a few big things back, it's really low maintenance, surprisingly. Never see a weed. I haven't seen a weed because there's nowhere for them to grow. which is brilliant. But come spring or come autumn, when it comes out of a garage, goes into the garage, which is where we store or overwinter our plants, that's a little bit of work for a couple of weeks. With a Musa basjoo, the hardy banana, a lot of people do go to a lot of lengths to protect these things by creating wire cages round and putting straw in. All we do is get a rotary washing line cover, just for breathable fabric, slip it over the top, it protects it, it keeps it dry, it allows it to breathe, and then sun comes out in spring, you can just take it back off again. It's very simple, very quick. Watering, we actually have a micro drip system, but what we find, because it's got a canopy, the ground never dries out.
We need the garden to enjoy the house, really. It's such an important part of our lives now.
When I can't see buildings around me and I can only see green, it's an amazing feeling. It really fills you with joy.
I do share Simon's feelings about the need to be surrounded by green. I think one of the sort of best things you can do in a garden, if it's at all possible, is to create one space that is truly private, where you're not overlooked and you don't overlook other people. And that way you relax. And it's so important, that. It's such a luxury in modern life. I'm just doing a bit of tidying here in the damp garden because it's had a tough summer. It looked great up until May. In fact, it was exciting. The new bog border was looking great. Then we had drought. We had practically no rain at all, and the damp garden suffered more than anywhere else. To be honest, I'm just grateful that most things seem to have survived. Things like this matutia, the shuttlecock fern, which likes damp soil. Although the fronds are completely fried, and they have been for months, the plant itself is okay, and it will come back next year. And at the moment, my favourite plant in here is the quince, which is fine and has got a good selection of fruit. And I intend to collect every single one of them because I love quinces. Now, we're going to a garden, I don't know if it's got a quince tree, but it's got an awful lot of other things growing in pots. And it's in South London.
Hello, I'm Jen.
And I'm Glenn.
Welcome to our garden in sunny Peckham. We moved to this house in early 2019, and one of the first things we did was get to work on the garden.
Even though it's a really strange shape and north-facing, it does somehow manage to capture so much of the day's sun.
We don't have any garden beds, it's all pots and containers. We always have loads of tomatoes and chilli plants. We grow potatoes in an old beer keg. We've got strawberries, we've got herbs, we've got blueberries for the first time this year, which has been great for breakfast. And over the past year, we've also really stepped up the flowers. Last autumn, we planted a lot of winter blooms to ensure we had some colour all year round, and we went really hard on summer colour too. What this means is we've created this really cool haven for wildlife. We get loads of bees, lots of butterflies, a lot of spiders.
So even a small garden like ours will produce enough waste to get composting. So we've got this thing called a hot compost bin, which, as the name suggests, gets very, very hot. You can compost with one of these right throughout the winter as well. It deals with all the stuff from the garden, plus the kitchen waste as well. We're lucky that our local council offers discounts for things like compost bins and water butts, so it was kind of a no-brainer for us to get this and get composting.
Hopefully our little South London oasis shows you don't have to have loads of room or even loads of expertise to create a beautiful garden space. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.
Well, thank you for sharing your garden with us, Jen and Glenn, and I think it looks fantastic. Now, for me, October is dominated by apples. And certainly in this part of the world, where there are lots of apple orchards as well as apples growing in gardens, it actually smells of apple. It's that lovely, fruity, cidery tang that greets you in the morning and in the lanes and even as you're walking the dogs across the field. And in the garden, I try and use and keep as many apples as possible. And as well as being a month to eat apples in every shape and form, it's actually when I harvest them and store them. So, when you're going to harvest, you want to treat each one as though they're fragile and gently take them in your hand and give them a little twist. And then carefully put it in a basket. And the reason for the care is that apples bruise. And once they're bruised, they won't store. And you should only ever store perfect apples, ones that have no blemish on them at all. And that way you know that they'll last. These step-over apples, by the way, are a really good way of growing apples in a small space. They smell absolutely fantastic. Now, I'm making this little pile of ones that are not suitable for storage, but keep them. And if you've still got lots left, well, there's even more you can do with them. But I'll come to that later, because we're now going to join Toby, who went to Bristol to visit an allotment. And this was an allotment with a very special remit.
Gardening, well, it's obviously about plants, but it's also about people, because where meadows, trees and vegetables grow, people grow too. And on these allotments, there's a very special project that proves exactly how true that is.
2 years ago, the charity Alive Activities started a programme to improve the quality of life for people and their carers living with dementia through gardening. In a plot of raised vegetable beds and a greenhouse, they welcome volunteers and visitors 2 days a week.
What's going to go in here then?
We've got some chard, we've got some rainbow
Chard
chard
and
just
stuff.
behind the...
Oh, okay.
When the site owner offered the charity an overgrown plot that hadn't been cultivated for years, project coordinator Guy Manchester, the brains behind the scheme, couldn't wait to take it on.
Why was creating this project important to you?
I think it kind of stemmed from my early experiences. I had a long-term illness for about 20 years. I was really struggling with mental health issues, and it was gardening that kind of got me back on my feet and gave me something to get out of bed for in the morning. I guess I kind of felt that I've experienced that sort of therapeutic side of gardening, and I knew that it had this really transformative effect. There's two sort of main aspects, I guess. There's sort of making it safe and secure and user-friendly, and then you need to make it engaging.
Because obviously dementia presents, in so many unique ways, as unique as the individuals that live with it.
I guess most people know that it's about sort of memory, so a lot of what we do here is about triggering memory. So we have a lot of old-fashioned plants like the sweet peas that I can see over there, and sunflowers, and we grow traditional vegetables. Stuff that people can remember, and we can talk about, say, lots of herbs for sort of smell, and lots of plants that you can rub your hands through and that feel nice.
About 900,000 people in the UK are living with dementia, a term which describes a range of brain disorders that affect every person differently, but include memory, personality and changes to thinking. So here, horticultural therapy experts tailor their activities to potentially encourage personal memories and for individuals to go at their own pace. Originally from Jamaica, John grows the leafy greens called callaloo, which he used to grow when he had his own allotment.
Now, did you grow this particular callaloo because there's different types in Jamaica?
Yeah, we grow this. What I'm doing here is to keep them going.
I guess it's like a herb, isn't it? The more you pick, the more fresh leaves you get.
Yeah, you take off all these leaves. And I leave those now to grow.
Okay.
Because that coming up and that coming up. To me, callaloo is better than cabbage. Don't take my word for it, but watch it. Try it out.
I will.
Get a good dish of callaloo.
Yeah.
And you cook up your chicken.
That's good enough for me. I want to go back to when you've come to this allotment. Has it joined up your life again?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I never do much at first, but come just come into the allotment and get the fresh air alone. And you have people just accept you.
Yeah.
That was great for me. As I come in, everybody knows me. That's your John.
Yeah.
You're back? I say, yeah.
Having dementia and losing the ability to remember or to communicate can be isolating. But here, gardeners not only engage with plants, but with other people too. Occasionally, other allotmenteers pop over. One of them even bringing their feathered friend. For Bruna, who lives alone, this kind of contact has become a lifeline. What brought you to come to this allotment?
My neighbours.
Ah.
I really enjoy coming.
And do you enjoy the seasons or just...
Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter. Rain or no rain.
Always here?
I love it. I love it in here, yeah.
Giving everyone individual care and attention wouldn't be possible without a group of local volunteers, like retired nurse Suzanne, who's worked with people with dementia in her career.
Watching someone going through dementia is one of the most heartbreaking thing in the world, really, if I'm being honest. That is not sympathy a person needs, it's empathy. We walk alongside people. Therefore, if somebody wants to participate in something, we participate. If they want to walk together, and we walk together. So in many ways, it's not a method, it's not a technique, it's what that person wants to guide you to which way we will go. It gives them a bit of purpose. I know that purpose is just that moment. As long as you're happy to go along with that person in that space, you achieve something, and they achieve something.
It's said that one of the challenges for those living with dementia is that their loved ones do too, as they have to cope with significant changes in their lives. Cara Chris has been accompanying her husband David here for the last year.
So you've always been a gardener?
I suppose. Well, when I was 4, parents bought this nursery place.
A small tomato nursery.
Oh, really?
We have.
And when you're planting tomatoes in now, or more specifically when you're seeing other people do it, do you think, oh, I wouldn't do it like that? Are you tempted to put people right, David?
Yeah. No, they were talking about getting rid of the yellow flowers.
Yeah.
I said, don't get rid of them. I said, that's where the tomatoes grow.
Yeah. What's your experience been of coming to this project then?
Brilliant. Basically, it's for both of us.
Yeah.
It's for people with dementia, but I find that I get as much pleasure out of this.
Yeah.
And as David does. David usually peels off with someone else.
Yeah.
So I get a little bit of me time. And I say to him every time we drive away, I just feel a bit lighter.
And is this place now part of the rhythm of your year, would you say, David?
I suppose it is. We're thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a fantastic project. Everyone who comes here gets something out of it. Carers get some respite, and gardeners that are living with dementia, we can see from their faces how much they enjoy the productivity and being practical. And with a syndrome like dementia that presents so many challenges, that's a very big deal indeed.
Come on. I thought it was fascinating the way that flowers like sweet peas and vegetables like carrots evoked memories. And I love the way there was so much laughter and smiles. It's clearly a really happy place. Now, I said I was going to tell you about another way to deal with an excess of apples and windfalls so you don't waste a single one. And I've got myself a very fancy juicer. I bought this a couple of years ago, actually. Now, you don't need a bit of kit like this, but the principle is the same. The first thing you do is collect up your windfall apples. Don't include any that are very rotten, and if you can wash them, so much the better. What you do need to do is chop them up. Now you can do it with a knife. In the past, I've used a spade in a bucket. As long as you just chop them up, that will make life much easier. Right. There we have a bucket full of apple pulp, and the next stage is to press all the juice out of it. Put that down over the top and wind this down. Here it comes. It is working. I'm the first to admit this is a bit of a palaver for some apple juice, but it's fun. I don't mind jobs like this. And hopefully you won't mind these jobs for the weekend. As we go into autumn, stone and brick paths can get slippery and very dangerous. And a simple way of dealing with this is to get some sharp sand, which you can get from a builder's merchant, sprinkle a little, you don't need a lot, onto the path, and using a stiff yard broom, scour it back and forth. And this will act as an abrasive and make them much safer and be effective for quite a few weeks at a time. Forget-me-nots have a habit of seeding themselves across borders. This may be the effect you want, but now is a good time to take clumps and redistribute them so that you have a more even spread and a better display next May. This is a job to prepare you for next spring. There are lots of fresh comfrey leaves in the garden now, but they will soon disappear and won't grow again until next spring, which means that if you want to make a comfrey feed, that may not be ready until June. However, if you gather leaves now, cram them into a bucket, as many as you can, chop them up a bit, and then top that up with water, that will give you the material for a good comfrey feed that you can use as soon as plants start to grow early next spring. Now, I was going to give you that classic TV scene of raising the glass of apple juice, drinking it, wishing you cheers, and pronouncing it delicious. Well, trust me, it is delicious. And do give it a go if you've got spare apples. But I've got my hands full. I've got a wriggly puppy, I've got a slightly grumpy Patty, and Nellie, who is insisting on holding an apple. It's all right, I'm going to let you go. Oh, you've dropped your apple. Never work with children and dogs. However, we'll all be back next Friday at 8 o'clock. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
All they wanted was a flat, but they ended up with a bit more. Accidental Renovators. Press now to watch on BBC iPlayer. Carp and barbel to be caught next on BBC Two if they can stop chatting long enough. Mortimer and Whitehouse gone fishing in Surrey.